Hey guys.
Thank you, man. Hey, Ed.
Hi, Kevin.
Evan sent me a note what he won't be able to join today.
I know
Curious.
Evan is sick, so he won't be here.
Yeah. So I think the person what I want to get today it was Christian. Give me a second, I'll try to ping him if he's joining. Right, so he is not responding. Anyway, gentlemen, I had only one topic for today to discuss is what Christian prepared a pull request for CDI repository. It's about annotation parsing, and this is the part what helps to do with CDI and runtimes. He has also patch for CRI, but before we submit the patch for CRI, this thing needs to be merged. And thus, Evan is not here. Kevin, maybe you can have a look, and if it's okay, when let's merge it.
I can take a look. Evan will be back tomorrow. I know we've been chatting.
Okay.
So he was sick since last Friday, but he said today is mostly better, but his daughter's still not feeling well. So he took the day off again, but he'll be back tomorrow.
Right. Well, when whatever comes first.
Yep.
Anything else we want to discuss, gentlemen?
Yeah, I have a question to Kevin. So,
Sure.
like with this CDI activity, so we have bunch of other things like going on this device plugin thing. So, like at least one I noticed about this deactivate call.
Yeah.
Kind of extending the API. So I just wanted to know, like, your opinion. Should we somehow point them to CDI, or it's kind of totally separated thing?
I mean, at this point, I think it's a separate thing. It's even if we do add CDI and do this whole mechanism, you know, that Patrick and us are working on, I still think there'll be people that continue to use the old way, even in its limited form. And so to me, it doesn't hurt to keep adding these features as long as they're not, as long as they're well defined what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I know specifically for that, the whole deallocate discussion. I know there's at least teams at NVIDIA that require this in quotes, and they require it fairly soon. So as long as a proposal came through that was, again, well defined and you know, had semantics that made sense, I'm fine with allowing it to get merged. But you know, once we do have this whole CDI based approach, in theory, we should be pushing people to prefer that method. And to re-architect their stuff to start using that instead of relying on this old way of doing things. But, you know, like I said, I'm not opposed to it being there if that's the way people want to go for now.
Yeah, but I'm not kind of like wanted to link it to this new resource allocation thing. So the thing that we tried with Christian is just like modifying this plugin to set annotations, and then on the runtime side, just do this CDI injection based on annotations. So even like without like this, the work that Patrick is doing, like would it make sense to somehow use this like with the current device plugins?
You mean deallocate?
I mean,
yes, it makes.
I don't see how does that apply to deallocate though?
Well, we can set up hooks like in CDI, right? And those will be called so they can do deallocate work as well.
Well, Ed, well, keep in mind, there are two kinds of activities. One is to clean up the device, and that can be solved with the hooks. And second, where device plugins itself, they might have some internal state tracking. It might be questionable how reliable it will be, but having a pair of events allocate and deallocate, knowing inside the device plugin, it might help someone.
Okay.
So it still makes sense.
Okay, so let's consider it as a separate thing. So, okay, thanks.
Yeah, my biggest hang up on whenever this deallocate question comes up about do we want that API or not, I always get hung up on the fact that the kubelet is not required to tell the plugin immediately when the device has been, gone out of use for that container. In fact, it doesn't at the moment internally. It doesn't deallocate a device until the next allocation for a device happens to come along. It's not, timed properly with the actual shutdown of the container. And so if anyone's actually relying on that to be called at those moments, at least in the current implementation, the kubelet's not going to do that. That's number one. And the second one is whenever people think about this deallocate call, they're forgetting that the plugin could go offline for a minute. The kubelet could go offline for a minute. As of now, the kubelet or the plugins are assumed to be stateless. And so, if the plugin happens to go down, a container completes, its deallocate call never gets called into the plugin. Are we assuming there's some way to reconcile that with the plugin when it comes back online? Or is it a best effort deallocate, in which case, how does it really help if you can't properly track things, right? So yeah, these are all the questions I have on the now rebooted version of this deallocate call. And they haven't been answered yet again. So whether this moves forward or not is a question of, can someone adequately answer my questions around all that stuff, which no one's been able to in the other times. So,
especially first one, I didn't actually like is terminated or stopped, and we'll call it. But as you said, it's not the case. So I don't know. Would it make sense? Like if it's.
And I mean, the main reason the kubelet doesn't do that is that at least right now in the device manager code, it's never even notified when a container has actually been shut down. Yeah, and because it shares devices across containers sometimes, and so you need to, obviously you could probably update the device manager to be smarter about this and actually send it at the time that the container, is being shut down, but it's not done that way right now. There's a garbage collector for the allocated devices because it's all internal state to the device manager. He doesn't assume anyone else really cares about that. So why bother deallocating it from its own internal state until it knows it is about to hand it out to the next one, right?
Okay. Yeah. Sasha, like, is this thing addressed in this resource allocation cap? I don't remember.
Patrick's cap?
Yeah.
Yeah, it should be addressed in a way what like we have an object, and this object has proper life cycle from creation to removal. You probably want to recheck with Patrick about the node part of API. So we don't have, so we should have not only like publish the resource, but also unpublish or somehow like clean up it.
Yeah, we have this call. I remember.
So if a call is present, when it's more will be the question for implementation side to make sure what it's like handling the corner cases, like when something is going out.
Okay.
But an overall, like the good thing about that thing is what like we will have object, and every object have a proper life cycle.
Yeah. And that's not the case with the current API for devices with the current device plugin. It was always meant to just be this stateless thing that is kind of, queried when it needs information, but otherwise just sitting off to the side and letting the kubelet do what it wants.
So practically, it's like for our use cases, for example, like where FPGA shut down, when they can turn off the power, that can be implemented still by hooks. But if somebody wants to have like deallocate for something else, then I agree with Kevin. It's kind of best effort in the current implementation.
But in this case, it would be like better probably to integrate CDI. I mean, like if like what Karen just said, that it's like this deallocate call is only called like when the garbage collection happens, not at the time when container is actually stopped. But hook actually does call is called when the container stops, right? Like this.
To be clear, there is no deallocate call right now, but what I was getting at is that in the naive descriptions that people get, it's just, oh, when you deallocate when you deallocate the device, that's when you would call deallocate, obviously. And it's like, okay, well, if you dig into the code, it only deallocates it on the next time it's going to make an allocation decision. So, it will take more effort to actually modify the device manager to get the semantics that you want. And then even if you do have those semantics, there's always the question of, as I mentioned, if the plugin goes offline for a while, you need some API so it can reconcile what containers and what devices have been deallocated while it was gone. And that there's never been an API proposed for that in addition to the deallocate call.
But again, considering like this complexity, would it make sense to just, utilize CDI API and just update the spec, just set the hook? At least it will be called when the container stops, and nothing is actually required on the kubelet side to support this. It's just a matter of setting these annotations. Yeah.
I understand the mechanism. I understand the mechanics for it. It's, it's a matter of convincing people that's the right way.
And it's just like timing it. So like CDI, even if we are lucky, it will take some time still to get it implemented properly. So like once we get the patch to CRI, once we get the CRI protocol, like additional field, and so on. So it will just take time.
Yeah.
And if we can solve something for people right now, let's do it.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
But I think that about this CDI versus or basically exposing CDI. So best advocation of CDI would be probably if we manage to get at least one container runtime updated so that it somehow supports CDI, for instance, via these annotations, so that we can expose a larger audience to it, and then people can start experimenting with it. Because before that happens, it's a sort of, many people are like that, okay, I'm not sure whether this will go forward or it will go in. I have enough of my problems, I don't want to touch it. But immediately, if it lands so that you can do end-to-end something with it, I think that's a sort of not opening the floodgates, but it's a big step towards that people can start seriously consider using it. So I
I
think
totally agree, Christian. And actually,
Yeah, I agree.
so
before
I would
you
like to
joined
get
it,
the cryo.
yeah.
Okay. Just go ahead.
I mentioned about your pull request to CDI repo, which
Okay.
needs to be merged before we need to get it to a cryo.
Cryo.
So Evan's
But I will
supposed to be
try.
tomorrow at work, so he should be able to look
Okay.
at it.
Okay, cool. But so regardless of that, so I will file today a sort of heads up PR to cryo. The only thing I'm just wondering, so why I haven't done yet, because I'm trying to take a look at it, whether it makes any sense to do some kind of tests there. Problem is that so I don't know whether it makes sense, because most of almost everything is done by CDI and abstracted away by CDI, and then you just make 2 calls. So I'm not sure whether any test makes their sense, but maybe some minimal thing would.
Minimal thing, I think it makes sense to have at least like if it will be broken annotation or broken variant annotation.
Yes.
So just to make sure what like error handling from CDI library is properly handled.
Okay. So I can add something like that. And then I would like to give those guys a heads up, because on Thursday there is the cryo weekly also, and I want to give them some time to take a look at it before.
Yeah, let's check tomorrow in Slack with Evan, and if he will not be at work when Kevin, probably you can also have a look.
And what's, by the way, the approach for this merging? So should it be like approved by like more than one approver, and who has merging rights on this CDI repository?
Merging rights, all of us have merging rights. The previous agreement was what like a person from another company merges. So approvals doesn't really matter, but merge is person from another company. Just to make sure what like it will be not the person next table merges and stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Sasha, I noticed today that the containerd was actually changed. There was this block IO patch, right? And it got merged. So do you know any details about it? Because yes.
Did it get merged? Because an hour ago it was not yet.
I noticed it in the code because my patch conflicted, like my CDI patch conflicted.
No, pull request is still open.
Strange.
I think it has
I'll check it out.
Or did we cherry pick it?
No, I think I tried to just merge it, like rebase it on top of their main branch. But I'll check it out. So if it's still open, then okay.
It should be still open.
Okay.
Because I see the pull request is still in the open state. I sent a link in the chat.
There was a function with block IO that actually updates the spec. And I noticed it because it was conflicting with my CDI device. So I thought that it's merged, but I didn't check the plugins, the PR status. Okay.
Well, that's actually strange. Maybe you're mixing with RDT.
Well, it doesn't matter. My question was how they actually managed to get it merged, because it's also like supposed to be handled by an RI, and so like when I tried to submit my patch, it was kind of rejected because an RI is going to take care of it.
It's a little bit different.
It's different.
Different because OCI already has basically support for these block IO fields and RDT fields that these are manipulating. So there is a sort of gap between container and OCI in that sense, and that's
Mhm.
different from CD.
Okay.
Yeah, there shouldn't be any with block IO yet, I think. With block probably, but not with block IO.
Mhm.
Right, gentlemen, anything else we want to discuss today?
Not for me.
Not from my side either. So I just wanted to ask from Ed if he has tried to integrate now this or do the same thing that I was doing for cryo using CDI for container.
Yeah,
I
I'm in
haven't
the
had time to
middle,
update.
Christian.
Ah,
So
okay.
I actually wrote the code, and it's just a matter of testing. So I will test today and then like update, just mention it in your PR that I tested it.
Okay, and then we can compare notes tomorrow if you run into some
Yeah.
problems regarding our discussion earlier today.
Yes. Mhm.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Okay. One small note from my side. I finally able to actually get to Zoom and all the past recordings, and I started to upload them to the YouTube. So hopefully within a couple of hours it should be fully available. So I started to upload like the most recent one, so since summer until now. But maybe I will check if there are some a bit previous, like spring last year.
Okay.
They're still available on the Zoom Cloud, so I probably also will upload them.
Hey, actually, I have one question to Kevin. So about the, so I
Yeah,
remember
sure.
that you filed basically, and I misunderstood originally this one issue. It was basically a feature request to CDI that which was stating something like that there are sort of vendor-owned directories that should not be mounted over by containers because they typically contain, for instance, a coherent set of device drivers and libraries or something like that. And then there was a suggestion that this should be somehow explicitly spelled out by the CDI specs and made sure.
Yeah, it was the
So I
idea
was,
that in the CDI spec you could declare a directory that
yeah,
the runtime, if the runtime was going to mount something over that, it would throw an error saying no, you can't do that because this is owned by my device
yeah.
plugins.
Problem is that I think that's a little bit difficult. So it can be checked, but wouldn't it be so exactly regarding this? Isn't it an easier implementation that if you declare such a device, such a directory, that would be an implicit bind mount by CDI? Because if you stitch together the file system from many different pieces, so you can mount over a directory so that you are not directly mounting over that, but you are mounting over its parent, and so forth and so forth. So checking that is quite difficult. But the easiest way to make sure that it doesn't happen, that if it needs to be the same directory as is on the host side, then you are just blindly bind mounting it from the host to the container always. So would that be a working solution?
I'm not quite following. So the issue is that I want to make sure that someone doesn't do the equivalent of -v over that folder.
Yeah. But
So, okay, go ahead.
so this -v, so basically what you want to make sure is that somebody is not shadowing in any way that directory, but that directory will have the content that you wanted to put it there, right?
Yeah, that's the idea.
But is it so that in this case, so is it so that the CDI specification will also contain a mount for that? Or how will that
Yeah,
directory be populated?
yeah, probably, yeah, most likely. Otherwise, a hook might create it on the fly, by using a bind mount or something. Point is that it's this opaque path that my implementation of the CD, what I put in the CDI spec somehow is going to make use of that. Either that's a direct edit that's part of it, or I have a hook that does something in that directory.
Okay. Okay. Because I'm just.
In fact, that's exactly what it would be on our side. So we have, it's a proc folder, but it's not only going forward, it won't only be proc folders, which is why it's a little bit more relevant. But right now there's a proc folder, proc driver NVIDIA, and underneath that, we need to selectively mount certain things from the host file system, but we also need to run a hook that drops a file into there and makes it slightly different than what's on the host.
Okay. Okay. Because
And so the way we do that in libNVIDIA container right now is we bind mount a tempfs directory over it, and then we selectively bind mount in individual files from the host, and then create the one file that needs to be different manually.
Okay. Okay.
In case of CDI, practically like tempfs mounting, you can do directly in the JSON file, selecting files. Also, you can do it, creating special file. I don't know, can be done in the hook or can be also bind mounted from the host part.
I mean, I think in our initial implementation for this, we were not going to bother figuring out how to do, all the special create a tempfs and bind mount in these special directories. We were just going to continue running the whole thing as a hook to start. But it'd be nice if going forward there was a more integrated way with the spec to do it.
Well, runtime spec has this read-only pass, which can be specified in OCI level. But I think there is no way to to protect somehow. Nothing is
And there's definitely, as far as I know, there's also definitely no way to create a new file with the spec, right? That would have to be something done in a hook.
Yeah. But the current OCI doesn't. So there is no way of protecting yourself against that somebody mounts something over something. And I think the checking. So my whole thinking was starting from that it's not so trivial to check whether a particular path in the. So it's really easy if what you want to protect is a mount point itself. If it is not, then it is not so easy to check whether it has been shadowed by a bind mount or not, in my opinion. Because it might be that you go to stuff in the directory tree, you bind mount that one, and then kaboom, what is underneath is shadowed.
Yeah, Christian, but if you own the hook and hook can ignore whatever is present right now, it can just mount over the empty tempfs and then redo all the things.
Yeah, that's yes.
Yeah, I don't care if someone's done something on the host before they invoke this command. I just want to make sure that, that the container runtime has the ability to say, oh, someone's trying to mount something over this path that something from one of my CDI specs says that it thinks it owns, and then error out saying, no, user, you're not allowed to put anything there because we own that directory. The same way it errors out right now, if you try to put some, like Docker errors out, if you try to mount something over anything under /proc. Like Docker detects that you put this -v for something under proc and says, sorry, I can't do that.
Yeah. So you would need a generalization of that in a way.
Anyway, I don't think it's necessarily, that important to start, but it's more of a nice
Christian,
to have, I think.
Something like what Docker does with protection, you can probably implement in the injection phase. So what if you are injecting mount and you see what OCI spec already contain some directory underneath in the mounts, then you can generate the error. Saying what, like you have overlapping mounts from existing container and what you are trying to inject.
Yeah.
It might be not really reliable, but at least something.
Yes. Yeah, we can add something like that.
Well, only potential problem what I can foresee is like duplicate the detection. For example, like if multiple devices trying to mount something like, I don't know, proc dash NVIDIA dash GPU 0 or something like that. So we need to make sure what those duplicates are equal.
Yeah, but those I think should be put then to the, so that's why there is a global section and the device specific section. And I think this is exactly invented originally, that these common parts that should be done once, they should go to the global spec specific and not the device specific section.
Theoretically, yes. Yeah.
But yeah, okay, so we need to think more about this. I was, yeah, okay.
All right. I see Patrick, you joined. Patrick, we actually already covered two topics we wanted to talk about. Do you have something in mind from your side?
No, I have another overlapping meeting. That's why I usually either am late or can't attend. So I just have the usual status update on the cap. So we need reviews and approvals, but overall, I think the dynamic resource allocation cap, the one that makes CDI usable in Kubernetes, should be ready. Yeah, reviewer time is the bottleneck at this point. The SIG scheduling folks, I think they have been fairly thorough with reviewing it. The PRR review is late. Wojtek wanted to take it, but I pinged him today and he admitted that he's too busy. So I'm trying to find some other PRR reviewers. But I think we still have a little bit of time.
All right.
If I remember from what I forget who was saying it. Someone was saying it in the SIGNode meeting. You know, when they brought up a similar proposal to this a few years ago, the main thing that blocked it wasn't anything to do with SIGNode. It was SIG scheduling side of things.
Yeah.
So it's good to see that they tend to be a bit more supportive of it now, because, you know, even way back then, from a node perspective, they were the one, you know, SIG node was the one writing this proposal and wanted to push this forward and got blocked by SIG scheduling. And that doesn't seem to really be the case this time around.
Well, I have a bit different memories from that time, but okay.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, and things I think have matured over time with the whole plugin framework that they have
Yes.
now, and all the CSI stuff has matured as well, and we're modeling ours off of that, so it feels less risky. And you know, there's a lot of factors, I think.
We are doing new things with the scheduler, but I think it's fairly thorough, designed and thought through. So I think it has a chance of actually working. So it's not exactly the same as for CSI, because that is still different, but it's at least using the same concepts. The implementation will be different, but I think we understand it well enough to give it a shot. And the biggest remaining concern that I have is the question about cluster autoscaler, because that will be tricky to
resolve. So let's talk about that for a minute.
Yeah.
So what is the?
Yeah.
I haven't thought about it too much. What's the major concern, and what's the? From supporting it?
Cluster autoscaler in general works by running the scheduler code inside a process that basically just has read access to the cluster. So it sees what the current state of a cluster is, whether there are any pending pods, whether there are any nodes that those pods could be scheduled to, and then it determines whether adding new nodes will make some pods schedulable that can't be scheduled at the moment. And then it triggers a scale up operation or scale out, I think, for the cluster. The problem is that it only runs a subset of the scheduler plugin functions. And in particular, it cannot communicate with third-party add-ons the same way as the entry kube scheduler does. So both webhooks need special support, and the new proposal with updating a resource claim status to get information from the resource driver, none of that can work with the cluster autoscaler.
But Patrick, isn't it exactly the same scenario with the storage? So
with storage,
if storage will be available, especially
No,
like
for
network
storage, the situation is different because the scheduler itself checks availability of storage, and it can do that because there is really only one field that matters, and that is the volume size. And that's a standardized
No,
field.
sorry, Patrick, I'm talking about network storage. So, for example, like you're requesting the volume is created, but the network topology lists what it's not available on the existing nodes.
But that if that volume has been allocated, the kube scheduler and autoscaler just work. They see that the volume is allocated and they can consider that information when doing pod scheduling. What we are talking about is a volume that hasn't been allocated, that hasn't been created yet, where the kube scheduler with the delayed binding or wait for first consumer mode for volumes. In that case, the kube scheduler needs to trigger volume creation for a node. It needs to select a node knowing that storage will be available for that node. And it makes that decision. That's the part that I implemented with storage capacity tracking. It does that information. It does that check based on information that is available in the cluster in the storage capacity objects. And that works for CSI drivers because they publish information for existing nodes, and for non-existing nodes, an administrator can basically predict what the capacity of new nodes will be. And that's the solution that I proposed for storage. It's still pending. The autoscaler folks have looked at the PR. They agree that it works. They just find it too complicated, but I think it can't be made simpler because the knowledge about future nodes simply isn't available to any of the components. Basically something that an admin has to configure. The CSI driver doesn't know about non-existing nodes. It doesn't even know what those nodes will look like. So this information for autoscaling needs to come from somewhere. It's really just a matter of usability, not whether it's feasible. But as I said, this works because the kube scheduler decides that a node is suitable. And with our current proposal, that decision ultimately resides in the third-party resource driver. But the autoscaler can't consult the resource driver because there's no way of communicating between the two. My current thinking is that we can solve this for resource allocation by making the scheduler decision optimistic. Instead of waiting for information that definitely says that a node is suitable, let's assume that it is and move ahead with an allocation attempt. That works in kube scheduler because if the allocation attempt fails, we'll just try again with, by that time, more information stored in the resource claim status that makes the next decision about a suitable node more likely to succeed. So that works for kube scheduler.
So let me just make sure I understood that last thing you said. So basically you would speculatively bring a new node up, and then he would pop, when he comes up, there's going to be a resource controller that also comes up on behalf of that. It's going to then now update information in the resource claim.
Yeah, that's exactly the plan.
Yeah.
There are corner cases, and this is definitely something that we need to try out in practice once we have an implementation, because I think there may be issues where we also have automatic scale down of a cluster. So suppose we bring up a node, it turns out that it's not suitable. Normally, if that node remains idle, the cluster autoscaler will delete it again. And we may end up oscillating with an unused node that gets brought up and torn down again. We definitely want to avoid that. But I think, yeah, something will make that possible. It's not easy, but we'll find some solution. Right now, my priority really is to get us started with an V1 alpha okay from scheduling, so that we actually get to a point where we can run some experiments, because if we can continue speculating how this might work forever, at some point we have to try it. And then the other argument,
Patrick, I would agree. Probably with autoscaler problem is not for first implementation.
Yeah.
Because if we start to, as you say, to speculate, it will be taking forever.
Yeah, I mean, I think I read through the comments that were done on the CAP, and one of the comments was, if we don't at least have some plan for how auto scaling might work, I don't think it's worth the effort doing this at all. So we have to have some answer to that.
I have some ideas, but I need to try them out, and that means doing a V1 alpha implementation and then running experiments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
That should be
Yeah,
sufficient, I think.
Yeah.
as an
There
answer
is
to it.
one other thought here, and that is something that I didn't want to say in the CAP because I didn't want to discourage or frighten the six scheduler folks. But at some point, we also need to consider whether autoscaling actually is relevant for those cases where this dynamic resource allocation is used. And that's the question to our customers. Do they really combine a third-party resource driver with autoscaling? If they don't, then this whole proposal is still viable, even if we don't solve autoscaling. So that's the other point where perhaps we will never find a solution, but it's still worthwhile doing. But this is something, again, where we have to have a prototype, need to talk with people and figure out whether it's how we want to move forward. So in the CAP, I've phrased it so that it's decided, that the criteria, I think, is decide about autoscaler support or have a plan, but it doesn't actually require that there is a solution for V1 alpha, for V1 beta. We are basically buying us some time, and we are basically postponing that particular aspect of the discussion. And I think the SIG scheduling is fine with that. They won't block alpha and explicitly allow us to work on this as long as we decide about it again before V1 beta.
So ignoring storage for a minute, what does it base its decision on? Yes, I need to add a new node to the cluster on just pure capacity of here's the number of jobs that are pending, and here's the said nodes, or does it know some properties about those nodes that might come up, like how many CPUs
It simulates the nodes. So it basically has a concept of node groups that might be based off an existing node, or it might be information provided by the cloud provider. And for a node group, it basically in memory creates a new V1 node object and passes that fake object into the Cube scheduler framework. So the Cube
to see if it would schedule the
it's called, yeah, it's called for all pending pods and this fake node to see whether the checks in the different scheduler plugins return, yes, this node works.
But at what point it will need to consult the device driver, right?
It's all based on information that is in the cluster and what the framework plugins need. It can't call.
But what I'm saying is what autoscaler simulates the thing. So,
Yeah.
like, yes, it added or it created virtual node, but at the same time, so like our allocation is not visible as a node. It's not part of the node object. So it will not help anyhow.
Yes, but our scheduler plugin will be written so that it doesn't say no to a fake node. It will say, yeah, okay, well, I don't have enough information to reject the node. Therefore, let's accept this node for the pod, for this pending pod. And that means the cluster autoscaler will come back from its simulated scheduling run with a conclusion that the node may be suitable for the pending pod. And then it scales up.
But when we don't have guarantee what this node actually uses.
No, there is no guarantee that this node actually works, but it will only do that for one node in each node group. So we may end up over provisioning the cluster. It will not be a perfect decision, but it will not be a wrong decision in the sense that it rejects to scale up because of a resource claim.
think it will be more safe solution to just skip the resource claims. So like we don't know.
That doesn't.
We cannot say it's yes or no.
You have to
Like
say yes or no. You can't say I don't know about this node. You have to provide a result.
No.
because-
Well, what I'm okay. Let me rephrase.
Yeah.
So we cannot just reject node based on the resource pool. So if autoscaler says I want a new node, when it says like yeah, fine, you have it.
If we don't check the results of resource claims, then it will not scale up some other node group that is required for a pod. So suppose it has you have two node groups in the cluster. One has your resources and the other doesn't. It first looks at the one that doesn't, brings up an additional node, and then it will check the same pod that triggered this scaling up and see that it could run on that node that it just created, and it will not scale up the other one because it will assume.
Patrick, but here is the problem. So regardless of how these resource groups are defined, we don't know if a resource like an arbitrary resource will be available there or not. Because to understand if it's a resource available, you need to parse all the parameters and you need to pass you need to get answer from the device driver.
That will happen once the node has been brought up. So suppose it has scaled up wrong.
It's probably not always the case. So like over the fabric devices, we're not dependent on the node. It's available somewhere over the network. Like
if that is the case, then it can be it will be allocated, or it will not block the autoscaler. We don't need to scale up because of a resource claim. For network attach is actually not a problem. If it's topology dependent, we may still have an issue where we scale up a node group that hasn't access to the network attached resource, but that's again a situation that will be detected once the node is up. That's really not different. But we need to check that at the point when that additional node exists, because if we don't check the resource claim to the autoscaler, it will look like it has a node that should be able to run the pod, and it will not understand why the pod doesn't run on that node. Because if that would be the case if we completely ignore resource claims in the autoscaler.
That's what I'm suggesting. Like completely ignore resource claims in the autoscaler, because
but if we do that, we end up with situations where it doesn't scale up the right node groups. It will see a pod, it will see a node, and the cube autoscaler or the autoscaler will think that this pod should be able to run on that node, and it will do nothing. Because it assumes that it has enough capacity and it's just waiting for the actual cube scheduler to run that pod. But the cube scheduler then.
So, Patrick, to solve it, I see only two variants. Like one variant is autoscaler is able to consult with device driver. If you bring in the node from particular group is possible. And second thing, like have in the node group property description saying what, like if you have a resource claim from particular class, then use that group. I see only those two variants.
No, I see another alternative, but we don't need to discuss that now. We don't need to propose a specific solution. However, we can outline a solution. I've done that in the CAP, and when we are ready to, or when we have a prototype, we can try out alternatives and make a plan for V1 beta.
Oh, my biggest concern is what, like when you are trying to outline the solutions in the CAP, don't assume what the device is actually present and it's countable. Like you can't really count.
Have you read the section about autoscaling? It's not in the CAP actually. It's really just saying we will have a plan before we go to beta, and everything else was in CAP in review comments, basically just responding to six scheduling folks asking about this. I basically outlined a solution, but I didn't put it into the cap.
Okay. Good. All right, gentlemen, anything else? Or shall we close for today? Okay, I accept silence as no. Well, good to talk to you. So let's talk in 2 weeks.
Yep.
Oh,
Yes.
well. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.